On top of the warnings, God put Paul in their life to warn them about what was going to happen. Here was the interesting thing. Paul was not the sailor that they were. Paul had done his share of sailing, and he'd been in shipwrecks before, but he was not a professional. And yet he could see, hey, this isn't looking good, guys. I can see what waits for us if we continue down this path. But they didn't listen. Proverbs 12:15 tells us, the way of a fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice. See, what I like about that is that part where it says, the way of a fool seems right to him. Have you ever known people that, for lack of a better word, they're just a bonehead, okay? I don't know any other way to put it. I mean, they're just not smart. They're just not wise in any way. Have you ever known people like that? People that make you, I mean, have any of you ever made bad choices, first of all? Let's clear the deck. Anybody made a bad choice? Okay, those of you that didn't raise your hand, you're not telling the truth, or you haven't chose nothing. Because if you made a choice sometime in your life, one of them was bad, okay? Bad. No fair looking at your spouse right now. Okay?
You're standing in front of me.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. You didn't choose to marry me. I chose to marry you. So, yeah, there you go. But there are those people, you know, you look at and you're like, what do you not think? Because they don't just do one bonehead thing, because we've all been part of the bonehead club. We've all done it at least once. But there are some people, they have put down roots there. They live there. And it's like one after another, and sometimes you wonder, have you not learned yet? You know, like, how many times do you stick your hand in the fire before you realize not a good thing? Somebody down here, I think they said, we've done it twice. You know, well, that's better than what some. Oh, your dad did it twice? Oh, okay. Well, he learned though twice. That's good. That's not bad. A little slower than some of us, but Mike learned. We like that. But this tells me that the thing is that most of the time, a lot of times when this happens, it's because people think they're doing what's right. But we can't judge our decisions based on what we think is right. Sometimes it may seem right, but it's not the Lord's way, and it's a way of pride without getting advice. I thank God for the people in my life that I've listened to over the years. Now, I haven't always listened, and sometimes I've been the bonehead. Sometimes I've played the fool. But more and more, I've learned to listen to the advice of godly people. I may have shared this with you once before, but my father-in-law, whenever I had a major decision to make in my life, I always sought his counsel. Now, I'm not going to say I always followed his counsel, but I always sought his counsel. And there were 2 times in my life when I made major mistakes. And both of those times I didn't seek his counsel. We should. No, that wasn't one of them. That was when you ignored his counsel, not me. Young people, I want to just say this morning. Listen to your parents. God gave them to you for a reason. They've been there. How many times, how many of us that are older, like let's say, I don't know, even 18 and older might work. How many times, now at 18 I still thought I knew more than my parents. That's probably not good. Maybe by the time you get into your 20s, you know. Definitely by the time you get married and have kids, then you start realizing how wise your mom and dad really were. But how many of you have said, well, I wish I'd listened to my parents? Anybody? You know? And sometimes parents give advice, and you're like, what? Have you ever done that? Have you ever had your parents, when you were young, did your parents give any of you advice, but you were like, what? One of the things my dad told me to do when I was at high school, I went to the same school from 2nd grade through the 8th grade. You know, this new thing when I went into high school where we had like electives, you know, we could like pick classes to teach. You know, I was not the smartest kid on the block, especially back then, and I was like, what are the easy classes? You know, let me find the easy ones. And my dad told me, take typing. That's what he told me. He said, take typing. I looked at my dad and I said, typing is for girls. Okay? Well, and then my dad with this little, you'd have to know him back then, especially with the little twinkle in his eye that only my dad can give. He said, yeah, and you'll be the only guy. How cool will that be? And I thought, well, he's got a point there, you know. He's got a point on that one I didn't think about. But then he got serious with me and he said, take typing. He said, I'm telling you, you're going to need it in your future. I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. But to give you an idea how glad I am, I probably type up 30 to 40 pages of stuff every week now. And besides that, you know, when I worked for the county and when I went into retail after a while, everything's on computer, right? You're always typing something in, and the keyboard on the computer is pretty much like a typewriter. He had some wisdom I didn't know, because I was like, you know, one of the first things I said when he said, you need to learn to type, I said, do you know how to type? And my dad said, no, but you're gonna. Wisdom. And that's just a minor thing. Many other areas of wisdom that your parents will pass on to you. And for those who haven't listened to your parents, it's never too late. It's never too late. The rest of us, we always need to seek out wise spiritual counsel. Talk to others that are mature in the faith. Pray for God to bring a Paul into your life that you can seek counsel from. But it is often the case when people are bent on doing what they want to do. Have you ever seen that in people's life? Where like you counsel them, don't. Other people say don't. I had somebody come to me once and say, how come everybody's telling me not to do this? Maybe you should listen. Maybe 42 people know more than you. Have you thought of that? But often, what do we see? How many times have you seen it? Like everything goes against them. God puts roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. You tell them no. They tell them no. Somebody else tells them no. And what do? They do it anyway. They do it anyway. And then, you know, the general cry after that is, what went wrong? Why is this happening? Well, they didn't listen to Paul either. In verse 11 it says, but the centurion paid attention to the captain and the owner of the ship rather than what Paul said. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided to set sail from there, hoping somehow to reach Phoenix, a harbor on Crete open to the southwest and northwest, and to winter there. Two mistakes the centurion made. First, in verse 11, he followed the advice of the experts rather than God's spokesman. Right? He saw, I mean, seriously, the captain and the owner of the ship, the owner of the ship, he doesn't want anything to happen to the ship, right? So he should know what's best. The captain, well, he's the captain of the ship. He should know what's best. But remember this, the Titanic was built by experts, and the ark was built by amateurs. Okay? The ark was built by men of God. And in verse 12, he did what we often do. He followed the majority rule. See, how many of you love this country? We're coming up on July 4th. This makes this very appropriate. How many of you love this country? There's nothing wrong with loving it. I think we got to, you know, I still think, I follow Brad Stein's logic in this. If you don't know who Brad Stein is, Google him. But I follow his logic in that the United States of America is still the greatest country in the world. And you know why? Because we still have more people wanting to get in than want to get out. But our government doesn't always work well, does it? We cast votes, and sometimes we cast votes and the majority wins, but the majority wins what they shouldn't have won, right? In other words, they cast votes that they say yes to something that might be ungodly or immoral or sinful. And of course, other times we've cast votes and had courts overturn our votes. And then they wonder why people don't want to vote. But how many of us realize, I think sometimes we forget this, as much as I love this country, you know, when the Lord comes back, And he establishes his kingdom on the earth. And the new earth is created. Are we going to have a democracy? No. No. We're going to have a king. Because you know what? The majority is not always right. We see that in Scripture over and over and over again. We know the story of Joshua and Caleb, right? 12 spies go into the land. I know what you're thinking, Dee. Don't make me laugh. 12 come out. But how many say, let's take the land? 2. Was the majority right? Nope. What about the story of Joseph and his brothers? Right? Only one brother didn't want to do Joseph harm. And in fact, he planned on coming back and helping Joseph. But the majority were wrong. Here's another big majority that got it wrong. Noah and his family and the rest of mankind. Right? Didn't work. Or the nation of Israel and every prophet they ever had. Or in our own life. The world compared to the Word. You know, I did a little bit of research on this whole Fair Haven deal that they didn't want to port in. And the problem, when it says unsuitable for harbor, it makes it sound like they didn't have like the proper docks or something, right, for because they were going to have to put the boat away for winter. That's what they were talking about. We'll need to dock here, harbor here, and we're going to have to let winter run its course, and then we'll set sail. But what they really meant by unsuitable for harbor was this. Fair Haven was a tiny little town. And you got a boat full of sailors. They don't want to harbor in a tiny little town where there's nothing to do. Right? I mean, not that you could harbor there, but let's face it. Would sailors that are going to have to harbor down for the winter, would they rather harbor down in San Francisco or Loma Rica? They wanted the place where they could partay. And they couldn't do that in Fair Haven. So they said, no, we don't want to stay there. Let's push on to this next town. This is where there's lots of stuff. There's women, there's booze, there's places to hang out, there's prostitutes, there's all that stuff that's available to us. So be careful that you don't listen to the majority as you're going into storms. Another thing, the last thing I want us to kind of pull from this is that we might not like it, but sometimes God uses storms for our own good. You know, sometimes we need a storm. I think, let me ask you, I want to ask you parental advice here. How many of your parents? Raise your hand if you're a parent. Okay. There you go, a lot of hands up. Now, how many of you believe in spanking your children? Like every hand practically goes up. How many of you kids believe in it? Yeah. Believe it or not, it's coming according to everybody here. So, how many of you have seen a child behave in public, and your thought is, "There's nothing that a good beating wouldn't solve," right? Right? I remember I used to think my dad was the meanest dad in the world because he spanked us.